I'm here with Melissa Kwee, who runs NVPC, and she has a heart of gold and was absolutely somehow designed perfectly to do this job. And she gives tirelessly and um, is an incredible gift to the community. So, Melissa, thank you so much for all of the work that you do. And thank you for joining with us and supporting We the Good as we launch out into the community. So can you give us a little bit of an overview of what you're seeing from your perspective of the current situation in Singapore with COVID, short, medium, and long term?
I think the best way to think about understanding what's going on with just all the masses of information that's just kind of hitting all of us, every day on all these different channels is to kind of think about it in terms of four phases. The first is really like what COVID is revealing. And I think what COVID is revealing for us are a lot of the cracks that might have been invisible to most of us before that are now just becoming bigger and bigger and more apparent gaps, and so whether that's with people who are really living more on the edge, who don't have like a very secure financial stream, or people who are not connected digitally, who now just feel totally isolated, in this time of circuit breaker, or, frankly, people just even struggling with their own, like, difficulties and sort of like mental health issues, that are just really invisible because, you see them every day and everything seems to look fine. These are all different cracks, I think, that were sort of becoming more apparent, at this time. And I think obviously in the context of COVID, the biggest gap that we're also seeing too is really just the conditions, that our foreign workers, or now a lot of people are calling them guest workers, just realizing that they're the guests and we're the hosts, so how could we have really been, what kinds of hosts, I guess, have we been in that context? So I think the first piece is really about revealing what's invisible, or has been invisible, and also the interconnectedness of everything too. We tend to just operate in our own little worlds. We do our own thing. We have our own, kind of friends and news and things like that we interact with. But there's so much more that we're kind of like now beginning to kind of interact with. And I think that what We the Good is trying to do is also bridge some of those gaps. But I think what COVID-19 is also showing us is, within the systems, how when there's one point of failure, there's multiple things that happen around it. So for example, we talk about people who are at home, now with having to stay at home this whole time. But how about the helpers or the caregivers, in those kind of contexts? Again, that's just part of a system that, again, is typically invisible. People who have chronic illnesses, who have a caregiver, who usually gets to take that person perhaps to a senior activities center during the day. Well, there's no option for that anymore, and now they're on 24/7. How do you cope with that? So really just seeing like each one of us in our as part of this broader sort of like system. So I think that's the first thing to kind of note about COVID, that it's just revealing all these different things that were previously invisible. The second thing then is really around what kind of responsibility, do we have in this situation? And I say responsibility not from a blame perspective. I say it from an empowerment perspective of we are able to respond. We can do something about this. And I think the question that we have to ask ourselves, there too, is what can we now not unsee? Now that I've seen these different things, what can I not unsee? And what must I do? Therefore, in my own capacity, however large or however small, what is it that I can and must do now? Do about that. And I feel like one of the greatest opportunities now is for people to just educate themselves, because we all have so many different stereotypes about, who needs help and who gives help and, and things like that. And we're so so blind, in so many different ways. So the thing we can really do now is just educate ourselves, because the realities that we live are not the realities of most people. I'll give you an example. So I do a lot of mentoring actually too with kids or young people, I guess, in more difficult sort of transitional situations. And I had arranged to see somebody at 10 o'clock in the morning on Saturday. So I thought, hey, it's 10 o'clock on Saturday. Surely like that's a reasonable time to get up and get out and come meet me, right? So 10 o'clock comes and goes. It's 10:30, it's 11 o'clock. And I'm thinking, hey, could you just be a little more like responsible and like tell me at least you're going to be late or something like that. And actually what I realized afterwards is that the girl that I was meeting actually works 2 jobs. And she finished the second job at around 4:30 in the morning. And she kind of went home. She went to had to get home, shower, try to get a little bit of sleep, and just overslept, And I think the point there is that actually the reality, whatever we think of as being sort of like, normal or, what is to be expected is not always what is normal or to be expected on somebody else's, side of things too. So I think when we take responsibility in that sense, what the first thing we have to do is just examine ourselves and educate ourselves. So this is why I love what you're doing too, is just helping people just understand the situation, better too. We try to do that with giving.sg by putting up all the different opportunities there for people to be involved so they understand what are some of the different needs. But, there's so much more, too, that's out there that we can do to just help understand what we can do. Then I think that moves on, to the last part of it, which is how do we then reimagine, how do we reimagine like what the world can and should be like after COVID? Because, at the end of the day, like, do we go back to the same old things? I don't think so. Like I said, what can't we unsee? Now that we see it, we're not ignorant anymore. What do we have to do about that? So then how do we start to reimagine the better new normal, that we want to be at in the future? So going to that, I think that's what's perhaps the exciting thing about this, because there's so many of us who have so many different gifts that we can offer, in service of that better future too.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question that's not part of our the 3 or 4 questions here, but it's directly related to something that you said. And if we, without diminishing the amount of suffering that is going on and the amount of financial loss and strife that we're in many ways, it almost feels like this is a blessing. I think for those who have been in the field of social good or environmental work or sustainability or advocacy or illegal wildlife trade, because it's also interconnected, and that's something that you're talking about there. It's just like, this is what we've been talking about for so long.
Suddenly like the lid is ripped open, right?
Suddenly the lid is ripped open, and it's given all these underlying issues, the ones that you're talking about for a human perspective, but also for an environmental and biodiversity perspective as well.
Absolutely.
It's just completely ripped off the lid, and it is on the lips and in the hearts and minds of so many people, unfortunately, with so much great suffering. But I do really hope, and I don't know if you feel the same, I would like to ask that this could potentially be a great turning point for us.
I believe it is, and you're absolutely right. It is not to in any way minimize, people's suffering. Suffering is always bad, but actually the silver lining, if you will, is that now more people realize the extent and the depth and the gravity of that suffering. So that's where I say, we can't unsee that. And if we can't unsee that, then that's a gift to us to say, actually, how do you be part of the solution? How do you be part of reimagining what things actually could or even should look like? I don't like to use the word should a lot, but I think that we can recognize that certain things aren't the way that they should be, and that gives us an opportunity to reimagine.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any sugarcoating where we're at. We are in an almost catastrophic place, and this is the beginning of. This is just the beginning of the unlocking of the door, and it's going to unleash this new normal. So it will take a lot of resilience adaptive skills, agility, and creativity to be able to move forward, and kindness. Empathy, so these are all of the things that we need to try and foster within our community. Now,
I think it's important that you highlight that this is really the beginning and not the sort of end, because actually, no one would have imagined that having something like this would take such a massive toll on our economy and on jobs and on people's livelihoods. Things like food insecurity, which you just would never associate, in Singapore, like that's something that now people are discussing, and they're saying, hey, how do we help make sure that people actually get good, nutritious meals? We didn't know that kids weren't, not every kid was getting 3 square healthy meals a day. And, I think that this is also a big turning point in how we see the role of citizens, the business, corporate citizens, as well as sort of just community members, as well as the government. Because, the government's job is to take care of the majority, right? Really, that's the main job, right? If you can pretty much squarely deal with like the 80% of the population, and then, provide for the people who are really probably like really on the edge, and make sure that they don't fall through those cracks too. That's government's job, but there's probably that 10, 20, up to 20%, more that actually needs the rest of us actually, to be there, to be neighbors to one another, to reach out, and I think that's what's again being revealed at this time, is that opportunity just to be a neighbor actually.
Even more so at these times. I think those are sort of in normal times, and now it's just even more critical. And what I worry about, and again, we're going off our questions here, but this conversation is to me so important, because what I worry about is, with the Asian culture being such that we don't talk about our problems, and we pretend that everything is okay. We push everything under the carpet. We don't reveal where we're at as an individual or as a family until it's too late. And that causes so much anxiety, and the levels of mental health issues in Singapore, are going through the roof, really. I heard a number, I read a number that stress and mental health issues in Singapore cost the nation $3 billion a year. This is pre-COVID. So that those people in that segment already, they're just going to be pushed, way over the edge. And so we need to normalize, and we need to let people know that it's normal to feel these emotions, and that there's support there.
I think that beyond just being normal, I think the other message that's important is that it's actually strong to ask for help. It actually takes a lot of courage to ask for help, and even as a leader, I say this to like teammates and leaders who are out there, is that a leader who doesn't know how to ask for help does not understand the complexity of the challenges that exist out there. Everybody needs help. This is no solo endeavor anywhere. Everybody needs help from somebody, great or small. And exposing our vulnerabilities and areas where we're weak is just really another way of saying I need you. And actually, we all need each other, and if we're going to get through this, then this is going to be, because we did it together, not because we did it alone. So I think that's an important thing to remember, that asking for help is actually a sign of strength.
Absolutely. And what do you think some of the greatest challenges you are, both keeping that in mind, in terms of being able to get help to those who need it, and the overall challenges of from where you sit right now that we face as a community?
I think that there's a lot. I think the one thing that's been revealed to me is actually this point that the model that we operate in is that we expect people to come to us. We expect people to tell us when they have an issue, or, they come and seek help and do all that kind of thing. But I think that what this situation is revealing to us is actually that the last mile means that you need to go out. You need to be proactive about reaching out, to people. And so, for example, the schools were kept open actually for the kids who found it difficult to have like home-based learning, and they found out, not everybody's part of this whole digital Singapore smart nation type of thing, but actually, it wasn't so much about having those kids come in, because those kids don't have a supportive, environment already, to begin with at home. So them coming out was difficult. At the last mile, it's actually, how do we go to them? And I think what that then makes us think about is, how can we each be, the eyes and ears, to just people who are immediately around us, actually, because that's when we can do the simplest thing, which is just ask somebody, how are you doing, and actually really, really, really listen to the answer.
Without being considered to be capable.
Yeah. Oh, I'm part of the Capo Girls Club. It's like, I think that's okay.
Yeah, and I think that's when it comes to people with, for example, people for whom living at home or staying or being forced to stay at home in these conditions at the moment can be dangerous. Those who are victims of domestic violence or family violence on any level, sexual abuse, or even some of the frail or the elderly or the not able-bodied people. So staying home is not always safe too for those people.
Yeah. That's why actually I think there's that saying, whatever you invest in peacetime, brings the dividend in wartime. That's true in families too, right? So if you've invested in those relationships, if you like each other and enjoy each other's company, then actually being together 24/7 with like meals together, or things like that, is not necessarily a bad thing. It can be a kind of a wonderful thing, right? But if you have unresolved kind of like challenges in the home, or somebody's an unsafe adult, that can just be a living hell. So I think again, the lessons for us going forward here are around, what do we want to invest in for the long run? We got to invest in today, and start changing that, I think, when we come out of this, as we are coming out of this.
Absolutely. I think the point that I was trying to get to earlier that I lost halfway through was, how do we reach those people? How do we reach those people who are in those conditions which are not safe?
So like, this is what I think, honestly, it is literally just the neighbor, the family member. It's like the most immediate person next door, which is why I think now, when people are saying, to you, don't just reach out to the people that kind of get a little brave and reach out to the person you don't know that well, to kind of check in on them too. And that can be, virtually somebody in your family, your team, but it could also literally be a neighbor. I mean, so the person who lives maybe 2-3 doors to the left, 2-3 doors to the right, what's happening there, and how are we being, the eyes and ears that would have been, somebody who cared about them. You can be the person who cares about them, So I mean, to me, that's the one thing, because not everybody's digitally connected. You can't just, and not everybody knows all the information. Not everybody can read, or understand all the information that's being given to you. Like, so how do you respond? That's what I'm saying. It's not just about going, having them come out. It's about us going too.
Yes, and that takes a fair bit of relationship building, and the community is one of the important parts of what creates a content and happy human, is that community. And so it is through building that community and fostering a sense of neighborliness amongst your neighbors that will then help you with the indicators that something's wrong, because it's very hard to tune in unless you have deep intuition to the problems that somebody might be facing at home.
More capable than normal, right? So if somebody says, if somebody doesn't answer, then going back again. If somebody answers with not quite a satisfactory, response, like checking in again with them, So, I think, I mean, we talk about gapo and things like that, but actually I think that's kind of what we need to do, a sort of graceful and gentle gapo, persistent.
Cookies.
I'll entice you with something else, yeah.
Okay. So Mel, what is it that drives you? What is it that inspires you to get up every day and do the work that you do and be so passionate about it and tireless?
I get a lot of energy from this, actually. It's not, I mean, there are definitely days where I just think like, oh my God, I'm gonna like tear my hair out, kind of thing. And I feel sad for what's happening around us. Um, but I really just do believe that, like, we get put on this earth for a reason. And everybody has gifts, everybody has talents. It's just that, like, sometimes we don't like acknowledge what we do have, and we always like chase what somebody else has, or wish we did something more with some, I mean, and I mean, you'll know this too, that, like, really some of the people who have the most really feel they have the least, and to me that's a travesty, and just to count my blessings, I feel like, and just to know that everybody can be a contribution. So I feel like if my role is to help everybody see how they can be a contribution, then there's like, an infinite potential for everybody to be, a little more like of a contribution. So I think that possibility is what I stand for.
And then on those days when you want to pull your hair out and almost give up, what is your counter? What is your solution? What's your remedy to yourself that gives you hope again?
A long walk or run, usually. No, and I'll just like go and cry, and in the jungle or something like that. I like McRitchie. So literally physically getting it out. But I think it's always just the encouragement of people who I know who have just stayed in the game, and it goes back to that whole point around being strong means asking for help, so, just being able to reach out to other people who I know are, likewise just committed full stop. Like there's no out. It's just like committed, and just being encouraged by their lives and their example, too, actually. I think that's why you just have to do it together.
So, what is your call to action? What is your hope that we can work towards, and maybe a call to action for our viewers, our guests, our community, our Singapore? What would you ask of them?
I think the first thing is really know you are good, know that you have so much good in you to express, and be part of making this a city of good.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Melissa.
My
Thank you so much.